welcome back to the Xmark channel. So today I have a video for you guys that I've been asked to put out, and it's in regards to the spring tender upgrade on the RZRs. So this, if you own a Polaris RZR, you know about this upgrade, or maybe you've heard about it, or maybe not too sure what it's about. So today I want to kind of go through some of the features of them, what it does, what it doesn't, and also why I'm a big fan of these upgrades, let's say over something like a bracket lift. So to get started, you're going to need to get your spring on a table or on a workbench. This happens to be just a made-up workbench. To get to this part, if you're not sure, there's a lot of good videos out there. Rocky Mountain ATV, there's your service manual on how to get your shocks out. So you need to start with that. So once you get your shocks out, now I can kind of explain to you here what exactly the spring tender is. So you have your bottom spring here, which is your main spring, and then you have your tender spring, which is your second spring here, along with your divider. Now this is a spring where majority of the time you should be riding on, unless you're getting into really large bumps where then your larger spring takes the brunt. Now the issue is from Polaris is that this top spring, the second spring, this tender spring, is literally fully compressed from the factory. I mean, it is literally squashed together and it is doing nothing for you. So what you really end up with is a really crappy ride, because you're actually riding on your big bottom spring instead of having a nice cushy ride on your top one. The other thing is not as much in the front on a RZR, but definitely in the rear, you get into spring sag. These things just compress all the way, and then all of a sudden you're having to bring down your preload to put more load on the springs to get your lift back. And it just compounds the problem. You end up with a worse ride and worse ride. So there's companies that have come out with these, and the company that I chose, these are RZRaid springs. They're made by a company called All Things UTV. Now All Things UTV does not sell to Canadians, so instead I went to cutterloose.ca. Terry there has hooked us up with a great set of 4 springs for this high lifter. This is actually a new kit for the 2018 high lifters. They come color matched in orange, and they're custom spring rate for this high lifter. So now before I kind of get into getting this apart, just showing you the differences, a little bit of things to talk about with. I'm going to grab you guys and I'll show you something. So they they tell you on a high lifter in the marketing brochures, hey, we put bigger mud springs or bitter springs in there so your machine doesn't sag down, and that's not really true. Now the front springs, I'll show you here. Hopefully we got some light. These springs here are a normal XP1000 spring. There is nothing different in a high lifter for the front springs to set up. Nothing at all. Where they're getting their lift, and we'll bring you guys here to the service manual, which I have a copy of, and I'll show you guys here, is that, so the XP1000 uses 0.8 of an inch in front for preload. The high lifter uses 1.46 inch. That is where you're getting your lift on a high lifter. The front, look at the part numbers, got the same springs. So high lifters, this is where you're getting your lift from. Now you'll see in the rear they're much different, and that's because this happens to be the rear spring on my high lifter. This bottom spring is way heavier of a spring rate than the standard XP1000. So that's why they only call for a 6.32 inch preload and almost 8 inch on the regular one, because these springs are much heavier. So I just kind of wanted to throw it out there for you guys. High lifters are getting their lift from the bigger bottom spring and a little more preload up front. There's nothing special to these things. Now this kind of compounds the problem, because what ends up happening is that this larger spring is putting more force up to this tender, and these tenders are compressing even worse. I mean, when I got mine brand new, right out of the box, all the coils were touching. So I knew I had a problem. The ride was horrible. Let me put you guys back down here. And that was the biggest thing. The fact that this thing was sagging, the fact that it was a horrible ride. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I was really shocked, because I always heard about these walk revving shocks and how awesome they were, how well they rode, and everyone started complaining about the high lifters. Man, they ride really bad. Well, that's with the extra preload in front and a thicker spring on the bottom. That's what's happening. This solves that issue. Not only does it solve the sagging issue, it also solves a ride issue. Now what I've done is I've taken some time. I've actually already installed these, all 4 corners. I've rode this machine so I can give you guys feedback before I do this video, and I think that was really important for me to do. Now, let's go ahead. Let's bring you guys a little closer. Start taking these springs apart. Then let's do some comparisons. I'll show you guys what the front spring tender looks like and the rear spring tender looks like in comparison. We can talk a little bit about it, and then we'll actually do the swap here. And then I can show you guys what's involved with swapping them. So stay tuned. Alright guys, so welcome back. So a couple of things you're going to need once you get your spring on here is you're going to need to get your spanner wrench. This comes in all the tool kits, especially if you got the Walker Evans and the Fox. They'll come with various tools. This is also your clutch tool at the end. So this is what you're going to need. You're going to need some lubricant. WD-40 works to get your threads, and make sure your threads are clean. Make sure these are well cleaned, well lubricated. This is really going to help to back this off so we can move this up in order to get our collar off here. And then we can slide our bottom spring and our divider here, our separator, and then we can also take our spring tender off. So one thing that you're going to want to do, and this is all 4 corners, is the same process, is that you're going to need to measure the distance between the top of your collar and the bottom and the top of the shock mount. And just pick any point for reference here, but you want to make sure to use this as a starting point, to set yourself back up when you put the new ones on. Now you may have to adjust this depending, but just for rule of thumb, just kind of measure yourself out here. Gives you a point of reference. All right, so with that, spray it. Spanner wrench tool. And these will be pretty stiff. As you can see, I probably have to hold this down. So as you can see, I just have to hold the shock, and it's not bad. It should go pretty good. So I'm not gonna be painful. You guys watch all of this while I go all the way up. So let me get this adjusted all the way to the top, give us some room, and I'll show you taking it off, and we'll catch back up there. All right, so welcome back, guys. So I've got this collar adjuster up far enough where I'm able to move, the springs here up high enough to be able to get this collar off. So collar just comes down, it can be a little stiff, and then it just comes out once it's down far enough. There we go. A little stiff sometimes because of the rubber down here. So as you can see how the collar came off, the spring came off. Spring down. Now pay attention to the way your divider comes. It's pointed down. Then the spring tender comes off. So that's basically, and you're going to do this in reverse order in order to reinstall everything. So, and then from there you can bolt it on and you move to the next one. Now the only difference will be with the front. The front aren't as long as a shock body, so you're going to have to use spring compressors on your bottom coil. Just take your time, but it went pretty smooth for me. It's just something you have to be careful of and take your time. If you don't feel comfortable, there's a lot of automotive shops out there that will compress those and swap them out for you. But the rears are definitely an easy do-it-yourselfer. So you may want to start with the rears and then work your way up to the fronts. But pretty simple to actually do the swap. So we're gonna cut out here, and I'm gonna do some spring comparisons because these are the actual RZRaid spring tenders. Like I said, I've already had these installed and tested them out, but let's compare these to the actual factory ones. So just give me 1 minute, guys, and we'll get you set up here. All right, guys, welcome back. So here we have it. We have the factory front spring tender, we have the factory rear spring tender, and we have the RZRaid spring tenders for the high lifter. Notice the color is really close actually. These have a little bit of wear on them in use, so they've stained a bit, but good job on the color matching to them. Now, so you'll see the fronts. Not only are the RZRaid ones almost twice the length, the coils are also much thicker. You can just feel it holding on to them. This is pretty light compared to these, and that's where all your lift's going to come from on these things. And it's also nice that with the double the length, you have all that much more travel to go on these compared to these ones. That's a big reason why it rides really well in front. Now in rear, I know some of you are going, well, what the heck? Which one's the new one? Which one's the old one? Now you will see that the original one is a little bit taller, but the coils are no way as thick, and they have less coils on this one. There's a lot more space, so there's less chance of it binding. Yeah, you can definitely feel how thick, how heavy this one is compared to this one. I was a little concerned at first when I saw this. I'm like, whoa, do I have the wrong ones? Because RZRaid states, All Things UTV state that all 4 of these are the same in all 4 corners. Once I got these things installed, I went, yeah, there's a big difference. Once you get these things loaded down the way to your RZR, you can see here, these have literally been touching every spring. There was no room in these things in the rear. Completely flattened out, all touching each other, doing absolutely squat. Like I said, this thing was riding horrible. This is one of the reasons I really wanted these. Let's get rid of the spring sag and let's get a better ride. And let me tell you, these things really did it. So I wanted to take this apart to you today to show you the different spring tenders, show you what, the difference between the two. And also, let's go ahead now, and since we have this, let's talk about preload adjustment. So I'm going to grab you guys. So when I first started, let me get you guys set up right here. When I first started, I went ahead and what I think everyone should do before you start this, probably should have mentioned this at the start. You really need to go measure your ground clearance. Find a nice flat ground. Find a place that on the frame that you can take for reference and use that same reference point. That's really important. Where you measure on the frame in front or rear, it doesn't really matter. Just the fact that you measure the same point every time. Now, in front, I actually had 16 inches of ground clearance, maybe just a hair under. They call for 15 inches of ground clearance on these, so it was a little taller than actually factory. In rear, and I had the factory 1.46 inches of preload. In rear, I had actually added about 1.5 inches of preload over factory. And I was still barely able to squeeze 15 inches out of this thing. That's how bad it was sagging. So, after I installed these spring tenders, I went ahead and I set it back to what RZRaid recommends, which is, put it back to your factory ones the way you had it. I had 20 inches of ground clearance on this thing in front. Way too much than I felt comfortable with. There are, angles of the axles and, you're putting more stress on your CV axles. It's not something I wanted to do, but I definitely had a number in mind that I wanted to hit. So I actually got 18 inches of ground clearance and I only have 0.5 inches of preload, half. They call for almost 1.5 from factory. I'm only at a 0.5 inch now. And lots of room, rides well, and I gained 2 inches of ground clearance with 1 inch less of preload. That's the key thing. Now in rear, I actually gained 2.5 inches. I'm at 17.25 with a full tank of gas and gear, and as the tank empties out, I get to about 17.5. And I did that with only 1 extra inch of preload over factory. I think 6.32 inch was factory, so I'm about 7.3 inches. And so I was able to slack it off a 0.5 inch and gain 2.5 inches. And lots of room, rides super well. Really happy with the ride and how much lift I gained. So when you are setting up your high lifter, sorry guys, this is something, or not high lifter, your RZR, whatever RZR you're working on, Polaris wants you to make sure that you have anywhere between 3/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch lower and rear than the front. That's just the way the geometry of this thing rides, the way they want the suspension set up. So that's why I have 18 in front and anywhere from 17.25 to 17.5 in rear. That's the way Polaris wants it set up, so I'm not going to argue with them. That's the way I'm going to set it up. So you may have to play with your preloads, but rule of thumb is they say in the instructions that your front should get lifted 2.5 and your rear should get lifted 2. But if you're trying to create that 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch of rake, it ends up being reverse in my thing where I gained 2.5 and I gained 2 in front. I could have gained probably more than 2.5 actually. I'm just throwing that number out there. But yeah, so let me get the shock back together. Let's get this thing outside and I'll show you what the stance is like on this thing. It sits really great. As soon as I got this done, I went on our first ride and guys are like, wow, is that thing ever high now? I'm like, yeah, it's sitting right, and that's what everyone said. Yeah, it's got that stance now, and it looks really mean, looks really aggressive, And like I said, that ride, it's awesome. Full on washboards. I'm not beating myself up in it anymore. This is the way Polaris should have done this from the factory. So you know what, for $299, you can get them at Cut or Loose. Terry is a great guy, and supporter of RZR Canada and a few other places. So give him a call, they'll set you up. And like I said, guys, I'm gonna get this thing back together, and we'll get this thing outside, do a little walk around, and you guys can see how it's sitting and with all the weight on it. So stay tuned. Alright guys, so here it is, sitting outside after the spring tender upgrade. So you can see, compared to some high lifters or squatting down, this thing sits nice now. Just give you guys a view. It's sitting at 18 inches now. Let's get the right view here. In front. And right around that, let's get around the back here, right around that 17 and a half in back. So got a lot of clearance under there. It's nice to work on. And just the stance overall is a lot different. Rides really well. Show you guys, you can see how much room there is here on the front spring tenders. And in the rear, the factory ones were completely compressed, and look at this now. So big ride difference there with the way this is. And like I said, only about an inch more than they call for from the factory, which was better than the 1.5 inches I had before, and gained like 2.5 inches of ground clearance. 2-inch ground clearance gain in front, with 1 inch less preload than they call for in the factory. So overall, guys, awesome upgrade. I'm super happy, and definitely worth the money. So I hope this video was helpful for you guys. If you have any questions, comments, anything in the video you might not be sure about, shoot them in the comments below, guys. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe to the channel. I'm always doing reviews, ride videos. I'm always up to something. So right on. Thanks for checking in, watching the video, and take care, guys.